is Daniel Soares. He is the head of data science at MapAction, a UK-based international NGO specialized in providing geospatial services for the humanitarian sector. Before joining MapAction, Daniel has worked on both climate strategy consultancy and data science solutions for energy projects. And last but of course not least, we have Dick Den Hartog. He is the Science to Impact Director of Analytics for a Better World Institute and Professor of Operations Research at the University of Amsterdam. He received the Informs Franz Elderman Award not once, but twice in 2013 for his research on optimal flood protection, and in 2021 for the food supply chain application for the UN World Food Program. Now I'd like to hand over to Parvathy.
Yeah, better? No? No.
Yeah.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. Welcome, everyone, and thanks, panelists, for joining us today. So this panel, we'll discuss mostly about geospatial data and how it can impact projects both in humanitarian sector as well as in international development projects. So we'll start with you, Liv. If you can give us a few insights into what kind of use cases do you see with your work at Space for Good on applying geospatial data and analytics?
Yeah, of course. So at Space for Good, actually the prime thing that we're doing is using geospatial analytics for social and environmental good. And we mostly focus on using remote sensing. So that is satellite imagery, imagery from drones or from everything remote, so not in location. But what we do, we work together with our partners who are in the location, who have the field work, building models based on that field work and satellite data to work on, for example, conservation projects. One example is that we worked, for example, on a illegal deforestation tool. So at a very early stage, with the use of satellite imagery, we can detect where illegal deforestation is taking place, and then the people on the ground, we send a WhatsApp alert. Even the people on the ground go there, they can send us a picture to validate that our model is working, and they can intervene in illegal deforestation. So that's one example. More in the humanitarian world, we have done a project with AMREF, so with the flying doctors, on latrine detection. So they invested in building latrines in different places in Africa. And instead of having to knock on every door, like, can we see your toilets? We could actually detect with the use of remote sensing if those buildings were even there, and therefore also measure the impact of their projects.
Thanks, Liv. And Daniel, do you see similar use cases, especially in emergency response and recovery as well?
Yeah, thank you, Parvathy. So MapAction, we have two types of work. One is much more emergency response, as Parvathy said. So there's an earthquake, a flood, in a conflict as well. Then if the country feels the need, he will ask the international community, Red Cross, UN agencies. And MapAction we deploy with UN agencies to help with the IM data cartography GIS. So it can be anything. It can be printing a map, put on a wall, and making crosses on space in places. It can be helping search and rescue teams to find which zones to search. It can be with satellite data to detect flooding. So it's, during the field, in the first weeks of an emergency, it's what people need. MapAction has flexibility of giving GIS data solutions. So this is more the historical thing we do with geospatial data. And now we're doing more and more on preparedness, risk, and spatial reaction. So with spatial reaction, probably have heard about is how can you detect a crisis just before it arrives, so you can use funding and actions to minimize impact. So it's between preparedness and emergency response, and that's where we see lots of place for innovation with simulations, with predictions, with data collection. So I think we will talk much more, but that's there in a nutshell.
Some of this, especially with prediction, machine learning, and others, the role of research also come into place, right? So, Professor Dick, what do you see emerging use cases, and what kind of applications does students and researchers in general can contribute to in this field?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so in fact, at ABW, we have many projects, many applications for geospatial analytics, and then especially for health care. It started several years ago. I would say many, but I think it's not that many. Several years ago, together with the World Bank in East Timor, Timor-Leste. And there the question was about, the first question was about how many people, what is the percentage of the population in East Timor that have access to a primary healthcare center within, let us say, 5 kilometers. And that is a 1-hour walking distance. And the next question was, so that the first question was more a descriptive analytics question. What's the current percentage of the population that have access? And the next question was, how can we increase that to, for example, 95%? With minimal number of additional primary healthcare centers. And that is more a prescriptive and optimization question. So we did that for the World Bank. And after that, many other questions came. For example, also in Vietnam, there it was about stroke centers, but basically the same question. And also the same data that you need there. It's about population data. It's about data of digital road maps, data about existing and potential new locations for healthcare centers or stroke centers. Later, we also got a question, that's the project that you also did, Parvathy, in Nepal. There it was about COVID test centers, but also that was for the WHO, but also for the AMREF and for Doctors West Africa. We now have a project in Sudan, in Kenya. There it was more about vaccination planning, all about, let us say, accessibility to healthcare, geospatial analytics. And so we also have now a toolkit, a toolbox, it's called PISA, where all kinds of methods are included that we can use in all kinds of applications to answer these type of questions.
So from what you have said, all three of you, it's clear that there are like use cases emerging, but what kind of specific challenges exist in this field? Like, is it data quality? Is it compute resources? So it's actually an open question to you on what kind of challenges do you see in applying and creating impact with these kind of data sets? Who wants to go first? Daniel?
I think all of the above. So the challenge is data sharing is a challenge, both when you work within a specific country. Some data you cannot share, some data is behind the walls from a government or an agency. Even internationally, now we have HDX, which is great. So HDX is the platform from OCHA to share data for humanitarians, but not everything is in there. So having a reliable source of information that's up to date, it's essential. And we see this especially in emergency response, where we have a short time. You just wanted to go to a place, get the data, and do some analysis. Data quality as well. So when you look at some data sets for vulnerability, for example, talking about children, education, most of it's collected within the country by agencies or governments. And sometimes the last report is 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So is it useful to use a data set that dates from more than 10 years when the country has increased the population by 20, 30%? So that's a big issue. And I think one thing is about the localization, because we have international agencies working within countries, but the interest is having the long term, the country itself, the local capacities. And depending on the tools, the data sets, we can have this challenge. So how to, in the long run, take the capacity from international agencies to local partners. I would say these are the three main challenges I see my day-to-day job.
Yeah, so I think I completely agree with you. That's also what we see when we're working together with our partners, that actually a lot of geospatial data out there is outdated, also because it's quite expensive to go to the locations. Some locations are just not accessible anymore because of conflicts in those areas. So it's also really a snapshot in time. It's not temporal through the time gathered the data. And that's actually also an opportunity where Earth observation and remote sensing comes in, is that we do have actually availability to these long temporal continuous data sets that are with a fixed frequency visiting the same point on Earth. So we can actually measure change over time. And that's also where this valuable fieldwork data and valuable fieldwork geospatial data is actually coming in, where we combine our knowledge of remote sensing and the temporal resolution and the spatial scalability, so scalability in time and space, with the context information on the ground that is just as valuable. There are a lot of companies that say that Earth observation is going to be the silver bullet, but that's not true. We need the context information. Every area, every ecosystem is different. And therefore we do need some fieldwork data. But the beauty of it, if we collaborate more, we can actually kind of extrapolate the knowledge that we have from the fieldwork data, from the context, to bigger areas, and also over time we can see change and also therefore impact measurements.
Yeah. And you talk a bit about scale, right? Like especially with research, do you also see scale as a challenge? So if there is a research outcome, how do you make sure it's sustainable and can be replicated and scaled, and how does open data and ecosystems play a part?
Yeah. So maybe if I do a step back, so I think there are many also scientific challenges that you have here, also with respect to data. And maybe that's also a subfield that is underexplored in my field of operational research. Fortunately, there are much more attention now. There's also Valentijn Steenis in the audience who will defend his thesis tomorrow. And there's also about the data. So also use, let us say, analytics techniques to improve the data. So there's certainly also scientific challenges there. But also, I think if you look at the application of healthcare accessibility using geospatial data there, I think there's a lot to do. Many scientific challenges in my field in optimization, and especially if you look at the scale of the problems, they are really huge scale problems. So facility location is a very well-known field. For example, in my field, very well-known problem. But if you look at the size of problems that can be solved nowadays and the size of problems that you have to solve in these type of applications, they are much, much bigger and much larger. So I think there is a lot, many scientific questions that has to be solved here. And for that, we're also writing now a paper where we summarize all those challenges. And so we're also going to provide data. So for the researchers in the audience, we will challenge you to solve those questions.
If I can add on it's the idea of scientific challenge as well on the health. So I had a presentation talking about the malaria spotted reaction. Because spotted reaction is about predicting, and we are used to predict climate, drought, flooding, tropical cyclone. We cannot predict earthquakes, conflict, not very well. But the health part, I think, is an interesting combination that we know how to model malaria, cholera. But now we're seeing how to link with drought, with conflict. So all of these conflicts, how can we predict themselves and the interaction between all of the others? So at least from a scientific perspective, I see this a new field that's growing.
And scientifically, there are like a lot of challenges, but also like Liv, you mentioned, there are challenges in respect to infrastructure requirements, and also a lot of investments have to go into creating the foundational layers. How do you see this evolving over time, and what kind of trends do you see? So moving away from the challenges, like how do we make things happen? What kind of trends are being currently do you see in your field?
So just to get a bit back as well on the challenges, what Annika also said, we really need standardization, and also in our field, even though we're using field data, also that field data depends on from who we are getting it, how it's looking like. So that also depends, that will also result in the quality of our model. So I think this standardization is super important, but I think it has been touched upon a lot on the previous presentation. And within our field, what's super important to know, and I think many people are not completely aware, is that we have a lot of free available remote sensing data available for everybody. So it's from the European Union or NASA, and that's everybody can use it. but people are not always aware of it, and the amount of freely available data that will only get bigger. So ESA is there's a lot of investment going on right now in getting new Earth observation satellites into the air with improved spatial resolutions, improved temporal resolutions, with specific instruments to measure different types of things in the world. And I think it's really important to understand that that is happening, and also how, as a company or as an NGO, how can we use that data? How can that data be valuable to us? And one of the things that, of course, has also been touched upon already is the AI, which we're using quite a lot as well. So, but also knowing when not to use AI, right? And AI is now the magic word. But to be honest, sometimes it's just a yes or no, and can be really easy value. But anyway, the development in technology will continue. The development in available data will continue. The most important thing is how to get aligned with it, how you can use it in your day-to-day work. And that's.
And especially in emergency situations, I can imagine like standardization becomes very important, because at that moment you need answers very immediately, right? Like you cannot go ahead and collect a lot of data. So how do you see these challenges being overcome?
And I think on the trends in emergency response, one thing is not only the new technologies, but the old technologies being widely used. For example, a colleague from Save the Children talked about COBO, digital collection. It makes it simple to take a smartphone and collect data, but lots of countries, they still do paper collection for health prognosis. So just being able to expand this digital collection, people are trained, they know how to process, is something I see as a trend that, of course, is a thing from the past, but for the future as well. The other ones, just digitalizing data sets, don't have anything on paper, on PDF reports, having tables, because again, during an emergency, if you want to know how many people live here, how many elderly people, you don't want to go to a report on PDF and copy paste. You want to have this somewhere in a spreadsheet, for example. So I would say in emergency, the simplest, the best, like having basic solutions, basic tools that anyone knows how to use, but can easily activate. And that's why with AI, I don't think we see that much things in the early response. Maybe it's not mature enough for people to trust and make decisions very fast. But I think in long-term projects with anticipatory reaction, with preparedness, we can see more of, let's say, new technologies that you can explore and make mistakes when you have time to make mistakes.
Exactly. And when you talk about, let's say, collecting data, that is one part, but then you also have to tie it to decision making, right? So do you also see a lot of research relevant, like scientific questions emerging, which can help you in better prepare for these emergencies?
Yeah. Well, one thing I see quite well, so colleagues from ACAPS, I don't know if you know ACAPS, and the agency work with analysis, is because they are doing hard assessments of there's a crisis, let's make a decision very fast, looking at all of the data available everywhere in the world. So this is useful, having some artificial intelligence more on the NLP side, on natural language processing, to scrap newspapers, articles, LinkedIn posts, or not LinkedIn, but Twitter, anything, and make a quick summary of what's happening and impact decisions. And I think the key for this part is combining the human and the tool. So the tool is scrapping, make the summary, but having the analyst making the main thought process to detect some mistakes.
Yeah. And Professor Dick, specifically in what you mentioned about optimization and also what you mentioned about NLP, the models could be too complicated for end users to consume directly. So how do you deal with, you mentioned the toolkit, do you make sure that you work with the stakeholders to make it easily understood by the decision makers?
So I think finally, for the decision makers, for them, maybe it's not that important what is used, the methods, and maybe only the final outcome is important for them. But talking about innovations and also scientifically, but also I think for the impact, I think an integration of, let us say, geospatial analytics, not only in predictive but also in prescriptive analytics and in optimization for really optimal decision making. That is tough, but I think there is much value in it, and I think that's also a very exciting field.
Yeah. So going all the way from good data collection, making sure there is enough architecture and open ecosystem supporting it, but then tying it with optimization, machine learning, and all these cool things to directly impact decision making, I think would ultimately be a good combination, I would say. Maybe we can open some discussions with our audience as well to hear if they have any questions, thoughts, comments, feedback, anything.
Are there any questions? Yeah, if you could come up to the mic, sorry. Oh, I see. It's on.
Yeah, Mark van Holmberg from the Red Cross 510 team. I have a question for Liv, because you mentioned that you also use, apart from the remote sensing data from on the ground. So I was wondering which kind of maybe innovative techniques you use to kind of integrate this heterogeneous data.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, actually, this is also where AI and machine learning comes in. I'm not sure if yeah, you can hear me. Yeah. So what we have really, actually, what makes our projects most successful is that we have a really good connection with the people on the ground, and they can. So we create models so that they can recognize patterns in the geospatial data, in the satellite data or in the remote sensing data that are trained on field data. And then when you don't have field data, but you do have satellite data or you do have remote sensing data, it will be able to recognize certain patterns in those data to detect illegal deforestation, to detect latrines, to detect floodings, to detect whatever you can think of. And that's the main way how we use it. But again, this is also really dependent on context, and that's why, for example, only for forests, how forest is defined in one place is different than how forest is defined in another place. So it's super important that you know the context of the area, that you have a really good partner on the ground, and also this validation that our model is working is also super important, so we can keep improving it.
Are there any other questions or from online? Any questions online or from anyone? Okay, well, a big round of applause for our wonderful panel. Thank you.